It was supposed to be a routine televised panel discussion, governors, political strategists, and media voices exchanging the usual back and forth about economic forecasts and state-level policy decisions. But when Karoline Leavitt took her seat across from Governor Gavin Newsom, the room felt noticeably colder. Newsom, ever the polished showman, opened with charm. "Glad we could bring voices from all sides today," he smirked, eyes briefly meeting Karoline's. "Even the ones still clinging to the 1950s. A few polite chuckles rippled across the set, but Karoline didn't flinch. Then came the moment that turned the air electric. "I'm just curious," Newsom began again, adjusting his tie for effect, "how it feels to build a career simply parroting talking points from aging men who tweet in all caps." Karoline blinked once. The camera caught the micro-expression, a mixture of disbelief and amused restraint. "Are you suggesting that a woman with her own ideas, just because she disagrees with you, is someone else's puppet?" She shot back smoothly, her voice calm but razor-edged. "I didn't realize strong women only count when they're on your side." The panelists fell quiet. "Here's a better question," she continued, leaning slightly toward him. "What exactly have you done for California that doesn't involve PR stunts and slick headlines?" The audience, mostly muted during the back and forth, gave a few surprised gasps. And just like that, the temperature dropped again. That moment was shared millions of times within hours. Screenshots, memes, reaction videos. It wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a viral showdown. But let's pause for a second. What do you think? Is calling someone a puppet just political theater, or is it a sign of deeper disrespect in public discourse? Let me know in the comments. Because what came next? Nobody was ready for it. The producers hadn't planned on this. What was meant to be a standard policy roundtable had become a battlefield, and the live viewership numbers were exploding. Behind the scenes, phones buzzed as clips of the exchange between Gavin Newsom and Karoline Leavitt made their way onto X, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts before the first commercial break even aired. But Karoline didn't blink. She leaned back slightly, arms still resting in front of her, eyes locked on Gavin. She wasn't angry. That was the most unsettling part, for him, at least. "You call me a puppet," she said with measured tone, "but what exactly do you call a man who smiled his way through lockdown mandates, filmed maskless dinners at French Laundry, and told working families to stay home while he lived a double standard?" A hush swept across the studio. Gavin tried to interject, chuckling like he always did when cornered. "That's a cute spin." But she didn't stop. "You govern like a celebrity, not a public servant," Karoline continued. "You care more about looking good on camera than showing up when your state's on fire, literally and economically." Boom. Even the host, a seasoned journalist who'd moderated dozens of high-tension panels, looked unsure of whether to intervene. Karoline let it settle. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't yelling. She was doing something far more dangerous in politics. She was making sense. Do you think that kind of confidence throws seasoned politicians off more than actual yelling? Sometimes, silence after a strong point does more damage than any insult. Let me know in the comments. Meanwhile, Gavin reached for his water. "Karoline, with all due respect," he started again, but he wasn't ready for her next line. She smiled, just slightly, and replied, "Respect is earned, Governor. Not rehearsed." A split screen was never so telling. On one side, Governor Gavin Newsom, composed but cornered, sipping water like it might help cool the heat. On the other, Karoline Leavitt, posture sharp, eyes steady, a smirk beginning to form, not from arrogance, but precision. Across the panel, the audience could feel the shift. This wasn't just a sparring match. This was a young conservative woman rewriting the tempo of the room, line by line. "You accuse me of being a puppet," she continued, "but let's talk about strings, shall we?" The host leaned forward, subtly widening their eyes, sensing what was coming. "You take marching orders from Hollywood, from party elites, from tech billionaires who wouldn't last a day under the same policies they help you push. But I speak for the families who can't afford their rent because your policies inflated their bills and crushed their businesses. Boom. The camera slowly pushed in. Gavin tried his classic playbook: deflect, downplay, deliver a one-liner. That's rich coming from someone who's been in Washington how long, Karoline? But Karoline didn't flinch. Long enough to see how deep the rot goes, she said sharply. But not long enough to forget who I serve. You could feel it across social media. Clips of that line spread like wildfire. Twitter timelines lit up with "Karoline just bodybagged Newsom live. This is how you answer with facts, not fluff." Did she just flip the entire segment? Do you think young voices in politics are underestimated, or are they simply not taken seriously until moments like this? Drop your thoughts. And while you're at it, who do you think won this exchange so far? Even Gavin's team behind the camera looked tense. He knew he needed to reframe the moment fast. "Let's get back to the topic," he said tightly. This wasn't meant to be a roast session. Karoline leaned forward for the first time that evening. "No, Governor. It was meant to be a conversation. But you opened with a label, not a point." Another silence. And then the crowd clapped. Karoline's last words were still hanging in the air like a slap that no one expected. Especially not from someone Gavin had brushed off as inexperienced. But inexperience wasn't the issue. Presence was. And she had it. Gavin reached for a pivot. "What I meant," he began, already sounding defensive. "What I meant was that your talking points don't reflect reality. The American people want progress, not party politics." Karoline leaned back, calm. "Then maybe stop confusing progressive with functional." The host stifled a cough, likely a laugh. Gavin's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being on his heels, especially not in a setting like this. His public persona was built on control, polish, and command. But Karoline wasn't playing his game, she was playing her own, and she was winning. He gestured toward the economy stats on a nearby monitor. "Look, under this administration, under Democratic leadership, jobs are growing. Inflation is trending down. Wages are up." Karoline didn't even turn to look. "Let me guess, you're using quarterly data from a selective sector and calling it a win?" The host raised an eyebrow. "Try talking to middle-class parents in Wisconsin. Small business owners in Nevada. They're not reading graphs, Governor. They're living the gap between numbers and groceries." It was the kind of response that made you pause the video and rewind 10 seconds just to hear it again. Quick question for you watching this. Do you trust national statistics, or do you believe lived experiences tell a deeper truth? Tell us in the comments. We read them. Back on set, Gavin tried humor. "Well, I'm sure you'll have a great future in stand-up with those one-liners." Karoline gave a half-smile. "They're not jokes. They're your policies." It was a reply so clean, so cold, so surgically delivered that even Gavin didn't try to answer. The host looked between them like a referee realizing the fight was suddenly very one-sided. "This is getting heated," the host muttered. "Let's take a quick break." "No," Gavin interrupted, his voice rising. "We're not running from this." But running was exactly what it looked like. The moment the host let Gavin press forward without a commercial break, it was clear he'd overplayed his hand. His posture straightened, tone sharpened. This wasn't damage control anymore, this was political survival, and Gavin was grasping at the last word. "The reason the American people support our agenda," Gavin barked, "is because they're tired of extremism. They're tired of your side pushing fear and division instead of solutions." Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't interrupt. She just waited, let him burn through his oxygen. And when he finally stopped to breathe, she leaned in and said, "You just described your own campaign strategy." Boom. A few audience members let out sharp exhales, half laugh, half shock. Gavin's eyes flicked toward the host, silently pleading for a pivot. But it was too late. Karoline pressed on. "Let's talk about fear. You said people fear the right wing. But what they really fear is losing their jobs to overregulation. They fear the price of gas doubling because you're chasing headlines with green energy soundbites while gutting real infrastructure. They fear the future you're packaging in buzzwords and selling with a smile. She paused, then asked a question, not just to Gavin, but to the viewers. When was the last time you felt like a politician on TV actually understood your daily life? Tell us in the comments. Don't hold back. Gavin chuckled dryly. You're awfully confident for someone so new to this arena. Karoline didn't even blink. Confidence isn't a liability. It's just uncomfortable, for people who are used to not being challenged. The host cut in, trying to diffuse the tension. Okay, let's pivot to the topic of education. But Gavin had lost his rhythm. He turned to Karoline again. You know, when I called you a puppet earlier, I wasn't referring to your character. I was referring to the script your party has handed you. Karoline didn't wait. And yet here I am, answering your points while you reach for rehearsed insults. The audience clapped, not a huge round, but enough to make a statement. Gavin knew it. He turned slightly away from the camera, trying to recover his composure. Karoline glanced directly into the lens. The real script, Governor, she said coolly, is the one your team rehearsed all morning, hoping I'd fold the moment you raised your voice. The silence after Karoline's last line wasn't accidental, it was tactical. And Gavin Newsom sat in it like a man who realized too late he was playing chess with someone who had already seen 3 moves ahead. He adjusted his jacket, gave the host a nod, and tried to pivot. Well, let's get back to policy. The American people care about housing, healthcare, wages. Karoline didn't let him finish. And yet, she interjected, in California, under your leadership, the average family is fleeing because they can't afford to stay. The host winced. Gavin's jaw tensed. She continued. You speak of wages, but your policies have led to small businesses shutting down. You speak of housing, but California has the highest homelessness rate in the nation. You want to talk about healthcare? Let's talk about the hospitals closing in rural areas under your regulations. She turned slightly to the audience again. Are we supposed to applaud that just because it sounds progressive? Gavin leaned forward, irritation in his voice. This isn't about applause lines. Karoline gave a tight smile. No, it's about reality, something your office rarely acknowledges unless it fits the narrative. The crowd murmured. For the first time that evening, Gavin looked tired. Not physically, politically. He realized she wasn't just attacking talking points. She was dismantling a carefully built illusion. The host tried to step in, let's move to closing remarks. But Karoline wasn't finished. Governor, she said, you called me a right-wing puppet. But I'd rather be a puppet of principles than the architect of collapse. That hit. And again, she paused. Letting the silence say what words didn't need to. What do you think? She asked the audience again, eyes back on the camera. Is confidence more dangerous than incompetence, or is it the antidote to it? Let us know in the comments. Gavin had nothing. He sat back, smirked faintly, and nodded like someone waiting for the credits to roll. Karoline didn't smirk. She simply looked into the lens again and said. Truth doesn't need permission to be said. It just needs someone willing to say it. The moment the cameras cut away, the studio didn't return to its usual rhythm. There was a tangible stillness in the room, not from technical delay, but from emotional recoil. Gavin Newsom leaned back, visibly regrouping. Karoline sat upright, eyes still sharp, like she hadn't even flinched. Backstage staff exchanged glances. Even the makeup team paused mid-step. No one had expected a segment on partisan talking points to descend into what was, effectively, a live political reckoning. As the crew reset, Gavin leaned over to the host and whispered something. The host nodded, clearly eager to reclaim control. Karoline watched them, saying nothing. That made it worse. When they returned live, the host tried to soften the air with a laugh. Well, if nothing else, this has been spirited. Karoline didn't laugh. She folded her hands calmly and spoke first. I came here knowing I'd be called names. That's fine. I don't need to be liked by everyone at this table. But I will not sit here and pretend the people watching from home can't tell when they're being talked down to. She glanced at the lens. Do you feel that way? Like the media and politicians talk about you instead of to you? Another pause. Another gut punch of a question left hanging for the audience. Gavin finally spoke. You can throw your lines, Karoline. But rhetoric doesn't fix anything. Governing does. She smiled tightly. Then it's a shame California's governed so poorly. The tension cracked again. This time, laughter, not from the panel, but from some audience members who couldn't hold it in. Gavin looked sideways, clearly calculating his next move. But Karoline was ahead again. I get it. You didn't expect me to bite back. You thought I'd nod, maybe laugh nervously. But see, I'm not here to win your approval. I'm here to remind the American people that the emperor has no clothes, and someone finally said it. And that, once again, landed harder than anyone expected. The next commercial break felt like an emergency airlock. Gavin stepped off set with a forced grin, but behind the scenes, his team was already buzzing. Karoline, on the other hand, sat still, untouched by the firestorm she'd just walked through. A producer leaned in and whispered, "You okay?" She simply nodded, eyes locked forward. She wasn't done. Back on air, the tone tried to shift. The host introduced a new segment, something about policy in action. But the viewers weren't tuning in for moderation anymore. The chat exploded online, hashtags forming mid-broadcast. People weren't just watching, they were picking sides. Gavin tried to reclaim ground. Look, Karoline, I understand you're passionate, but real governance is more than clapping back at soundbites. Where are your solutions? Karoline's voice stayed low and deliberate. Solutions don't come from the same hands that lit the fire, Governor. They come from those who still believe in rebuilding. She leaned in, poised and calm. California used to be the dream. Now it's the warning. Gavin scoffed. You're quoting campaign ads now. Karoline didn't flinch. I'm quoting residents. Have you actually talked to the people who left? Or do they not count because they stopped clapping? The question hung in the air. Would you stay in a state that taxed you out, silenced dissent, and then blamed others when it collapsed? The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy. The host tried to steer the conversation again, but Karoline interrupted. You know, I was told I'd be outclassed here. That I'd be overwhelmed by experience. But if experience just means dodging responsibility with flair, then I'd rather be inexperienced and honest. It was an uppercut in disguise, clean, quiet, undeniable. Gavin smiled, but his jaw was tight. You're clever, he admitted, but cleverness doesn't fix the economy. Neither does arrogance, she shot back. The room went still again. And somewhere, across thousands of screens, viewers leaned in a little closer. As the interview rolled into its final segments, there was a shift in Gavin's demeanor, not quite panic, but a subtle unraveling. His composure now felt like a performance running overtime. The usual tools, deflection, charm, political smirks, weren't landing anymore. Karoline wasn't just resisting, she was redirecting. So let me ask you something, she said, breaking the rhythm. If your state is doing so well, why are families leaving it in record numbers? Why is the national spotlight on San Francisco not because it's a beacon of progress but because it's a cautionary tale? Gavin raised his eyebrows, masking discomfort. That's a simplistic narrative. Karoline didn't blink. Simple doesn't mean false. Sometimes the truth is simple. You've built a political fortress so high, you can't even hear the people outside it anymore. There was a quiet gasp from the studio crew. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in tighter. Gavin gave a strained laugh. Let's not pretend populism is policy, Karoline. Let's not pretend performance is leadership, she replied coldly. And then, Karoline pivoted. You say I'm a right-wing puppet, she continued, quoting his earlier jab, but isn't it funny how the people who scream about unity are always the first to dehumanize those who disagree with them? There was no shouting. No table pounding. Just calm devastation. Gavin tried to interject, but Karoline held her line. You don't know me. You don't know where I came from. You don't know the people I represent. But what you do know is that I'm not afraid to say what others won't. And that scares you, doesn't it? A beat. That one moment felt longer than the whole interview. Viewers across the country were now asking themselves, did Karoline just expose what polished politics refuses to admit? Gavin finally answered, voice lower. I don't fear you, Karoline. I fear what this country becomes if your rhetoric replaces reason. She gave him a slow nod. Then maybe you should fear complacency more. And there it was. No mic drop. No applause. Just a cold truth laid bare. The host, visibly rattled, wrapped the segment. Well, that was a conversation we won't forget anytime soon. No one in the room dared to move. The cameras faded to black, but the room didn't move. Even after the red light on the camera stopped glowing, no one exhaled. Karoline sat still, her hands calmly folded on the table. Gavin turned slightly away, blinking faster than usual, the subtle body language of someone reeling internally but desperate not to show it. Backstage, producers whispered frantically. One assistant mouthed, "Do we cut this segment?" But it was too late. The moment was already out. Clipped, posted, spreading. Karoline slowly stood up. Good debate, she said plainly, her voice stripped of sarcasm or smugness. She didn't need either. She had said everything she needed to, and more. Gavin nodded back stiffly. You know this is going to go viral, right? She paused. I'm counting on it. As she walked past the rows of silent crew members, one of them, a young tech holding a boom mic, gave her a subtle thumbs up. Karoline didn't acknowledge it. She just kept walking. Not for the applause. Not for the fame. But because, in that room, in that moment, she had broken through the noise. Sometimes, it's not who speaks the loudest. It's who leaves everyone speechless. Outside the studio, the night was quiet. A few protesters stood near the exit gates, unsure what had just happened inside but certain that something had shifted. Across the country, social media exploded. Hashtags trended. Clips looped endlessly. Analysts scrambled to spin it. Supporters cheered. Critics choked on their own words. And somewhere, watching from a living room across the nation, an undecided voter whispered. Damn, that girl's not just another voice. She's the reckoning. Thanks for watching. Whether you agree or not, it's moments like this that reveal what people are truly made of. Leave a comment. Was Karoline out of line, or did she say what everyone else was too afraid to? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that cut deeper than headlines. See you in the next one.